Welcome to this Tradition Deep Dive, hosted by the Contemplative Studies Centre at the University of Melbourne. I'm Dr. Colin Joyce, an Insight Fellow at the Centre. So I'd like to start the session by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of this land, which many of us are. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to any and all Indigenous Australians present here today. So today we are joined by Tim Wood and Donya Igari. Tim is a PhD candidate in the Contemplative Studies Centre, and Donya is a research officer in the Doherty Institute at the University of Melbourne. In this workshop, Tim and Donya will explore prayer and meditation in the Baha'i faith and their role in establishing the Baha'is' role in establishing an inclusive and vibrant community life. The workshop is designed to be interactive, but please note that it is being recorded, so if you prefer to keep your camera off and microphone off, you are welcome to. Please also post questions and comments in the chat. So welcome, Tim and Donya. There you go.
There we go.
Oh, there we are. Good. Hello.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Colin, and thanks to the Contemplative Studies Center team. We're very excited to be here with you this afternoon or this morning or evening, wherever you may be. We wanted to share that today we'll learn about meditation in the Baha'i faith, and we'll explore the topic through polls, presentations, a meditative space like Baha'is might cultivate in their neighborhood, as well as some interactive discussion. The first hour will focus on presenting information about the Baha'i faith, and in the second, we'll get to experience a meditative space together and end with an interactive discussion. By the end, we'll hope you walk away with more information about contemplative practices in the Baha'i faith and feel warmly invited to participate in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and ask for the first poll, if Daniel would share that. So everyone, if you would, just take a moment to respond to the questions that you see in the poll on your screen. I'll just continue. So what is the Baha'i faith? The Baha'i faith is, oh, there we go, an independent world religion established in Iran in 1844. It's the second most widespread religion in the world behind Christianity. And its goal and operating principle is unity. So when we think about the way Baha'is go about what we do, we try to use unifying means to accomplish unifying ends. So central Baha'i beliefs, when we're thinking about them, these are the ones that are at the top of the list: the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of humanity. So by the oneness of God, we mean people may refer to God by many different names: Allah, Yahweh, Dios, the Great Spirit. These may be seemingly very different, but according to Baha'i belief, they all refer to one and the same being. And religion, Baha'i see as one book with many chapters, and each of those chapters is part of an unfolding story by which God speaks to humanity. And humanity is essentially one race, one people. So those are what Baha'is will often refer to as the three onenesses. And so we believe that there's a creator God that created us out of love, and that God is unknowable in essence. So that's the first teaching about God, that we can't understand God in the same way that we can't be in the same place as the sun, because it would be too overwhelming. We'd be consumed by it. So human understanding doesn't encompass the divinity. But out of God's love, God sends guidance through the form of manifestations. And in the Baha'i writings, there's a quotation that says, "Love me that I may love thee, wherefore do thou name my name, that I may fill thy soul with the spirit of life. And that, in a nutshell, is the relationship between God and humanity. And the manifestations are the physicians for each time period. So just as there might be different ailments or diseases that afflict the body of humanity over time, each physician says something specific to the needs of that time to address whatever humanity is going through. So if you think of the Baha'i worldview in context of understanding what Baha'is mean by meditation, this is the Baha'i worldview in a nutshell. So we think of that top line of this symbol, the ringstone symbol, as the creator, the middle line as the manifestations of God or messengers that reveal God's will and purpose to humanity. And the bottom line represents the whole of creation, including people. You'll see that there are two stars on the left and right. Those represent the two manifestations of God for today. The Bab and Baha'u'llah, those names in Arabic mean the gate, B-A-B, and the glory of God. So the Baha'i teachings share that we have two twin duties, to know and to do. So the Baha'i faith is concerned both with knowledge and with action. And prayer and meditation are key in the process of coming to know the manifestation of God for today, and to carrying out or translating into material reality the spiritual truths that have been shared by the manifestation of God for today. So the idea that encompasses this unfoldment of the different chapters in the book of religion or the book of Revelation is progressive revelation. We think that instead of sharing all that God could tell humanity all at once, each dispensation or each messenger shares a little bit, just what's needed, just what's digestible for humanity in that day. So just like it would be unjust to feed steak to an infant, according to the capacity of humanity, you start with teachings that are appropriate to the stage of development, starting with milk. And so you can see that these are the divine messengers, the physicians that throughout history have educated humanity and revealed what's needed to make the next step in our journey. So what did Baha'u'llah teach? You'll see on the screen many different teachings, and they may resonate with you as being appropriate to this day. So I'd welcome you to share in the chat anything that strikes you as something you might want to learn more about, or that we could talk about. And while you're doing that, I'll just address a few of them. So the primary ailment, or the primary sickness that Baha'u'llah says is afflicting humanity in this day is prejudice. And prejudice is what divides us and keeps us from seeing and perceiving the oneness of humanity. And part of that is blind imitation of the past, that we blindly just do what has been done previously without understanding or consciousness. And so movement towards unity requires the elimination of prejudice and becoming more conscious and having a practical wisdom about how we go about daily life. So that's one principle. Another is the equality of women and men. One of the Baha'i teachings says that a precursor of world peace will be establishing the equality of women and men, because when women are in positions of decision-making and governance across the world, their sons will no longer be sent to war. The harmony of science and religion is another principle that is very important in the Baha'i faith. It is, again, another precursor to peace. And the idea that Baha'u'llah has taught is that science and religion are two communities of knowledge and practice, which both search to better understand the truth, and the truth is one. So necessarily they must be in agreement. Okay, so in the chat that someone has shared, would love to hear more about prescriptions for how to achieve harmony among science and religion. And from the Baha'i teachings, what Baha'u'llah has shared are often like principles or ways of going about decision making, and it's incumbent on practitioners of the Baha'i faith or anyone who wants to apply Baha'u'llah's teachings in reality to learn how to do that over time. So we may hold that the principle of the harmony of science and religion is true, but how to bring that about requires effort among many people over a long period of time. One aspect of it is consultation. Consultation is a Baha'i teaching that's a method of sharing frankly and lovingly observations about reality. And so consultation is a means of trying to understand reality collaboratively, again, through frank and loving observations and decision making. So it's a collaborative process where one person or especially in a political process or in a local decision-making process, it's run by group consensus, but regards relevant factual information, defers to science, and as practitioners of religion, Baha'is are encouraged to check their religious beliefs in the light of science. So those are some of the principles relevant to the harmony of science and religion. Okay, I'd like to ask for two brave readers from the audience to participate by reading. The first reader will read the first two paragraphs, and then we're hoping to have a second brave reader to finish off reading the rest of this quote. This is a quote from Abdul Baha, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, and I'm just saying those names out loud so that you can hear them. Again, in Arabic, that's Baha'u'llah, and the quote is from Abdul Baha. I see that we have a volunteer, Charles Sturt, and perhaps we could get one more volunteer. Okay, feel free to begin reading. Thank you to the first volunteer.
Baha'u'llah says there is a sign from God in every phenomenon. The sign of the intellect is contemplation, and the sign of contemplation is silence, because it is impossible for a man to do two things at one time. He cannot speak and meditate. The spirit of man is itself informed and strengthened during meditation. Through it, affairs of which man knew nothing are unfolded before his view. Through it, he receives divine inspiration. Through it, he receives heavenly food. Meditation is the key for opening the doors of mysteries. In that state, man abstracts himself. In that state, man withdraws himself from all outside objects. In that subjective mood, he is immersed in the ocean of spiritual life and can unfold the secrets of things in themselves. To illustrate this, think of man as endowed with two kinds of sight. When the power of insight is being used, the outward power of vision does not see.
Thank you. Is there a second volunteer? Maybe I could just ask if Colin, would you be willing to read the second half of the quote? Starting with this faculty.
Yep. So just this faculty brings forth from the invisible plane the sciences and arts. Through the meditative faculty, inventions are made possible, colossal undertakings are carried out. Through it, governments can run smoothly. Through this faculty, man enters into the very kingdom of God. Nevertheless, some thoughts are useless to men. They are like waves moving in the sea without result. but if the faculty of meditation is bathed in the inner light and characterized with divine attributes, the results will be confirmed. The meditative faculty is akin to the mirror. If you put before it earthly objects, it will reflect them. Therefore, if the spirit of persons is contemplating earthly subjects, they will be informed of these.
Thank you to both the readers. You can see from this quote a little bit about, from the Baha'i perspective, what meditation is. And we wanted to share with you that if you're seeking to sample or like a dish in a Baha'i restaurant called meditation, you're not likely to find it. It's not something that, for its own sake, Baha'is really emphasize in individual practice, but it may be incorporated into side dishes, or you might be able to get a taste of it as an ingredient in other things. So that's what we'll talk about now. Baha'u'llah is given the command to pray and meditate daily, but the method of that is left entirely to the individual. To meditate on the meaning of the writings, and to say daily 95 times Allahu Akbar, which in Arabic means God is most glorious. Now, this is a word that often you'll hear Baha'is say to one another in greeting as well, Allahu Akbar. We're also encouraged to live in a state of prayer and to hold ourselves to account each day as part of a daily reflection. We don't have clergy, and often the individual is encouraged to just reflect on their day and think about what went well, what could be improved, as a means of just improving over time through reflection. And so from a Baha'i perspective, we don't have a ritual or prescribed method for meditation. There are no monks or ascetics in the Baha'i faith. And you may notice that some aspects of religion stay the same over time. And there are other aspects of religion that seem to differ and change. And most people can identify love or the golden rule appearing across religious traditions. But there's a tablet where Baha'u'llah announces some things that have changed. It's called the Tablet of Bisharat, or Glad Tidings. And in it, he abolishes holy war. He establishes interfaith dialogue. The third calls for a universal auxiliary language. The sixth Bisharat calls for the establishment of the lesser peace, which is the cessation of hostility among mankind. And the eighth Bisharat calls for monks and ascetics to come out of seclusion. And I'll just read briefly the language that he uses. He lauds the pious deeds of the monks and priests among the followers of the Spirit. Upon him be the presence of God, and are remembered in his presence. In this day, however, let them, meaning the monks, give up the life of seclusion and direct their steps towards the open world, and busy themselves with that which will profit themselves and others. So that's a little bit more context of the writing that calls for monks to move into the open world. And so as part of practicing meditation and contemplation in daily life, we have a twofold moral purpose: to improve ourselves through education and reflection, and then also to serve others. And reflection is a part of this process, both in scientific practice and in religion. So here's some photos of Baha'i community life in Melbourne area. And a lot of what Baha'i community life consists of is studying holy writings, reflecting on Baha'u'llah's teachings, and trying to put them into practice in our own locality. So there are activities for children, there are study circles for adults, and for junior youth, which is the term we use for 11 to 15-year-olds, there are spiritual empowerment groups in which they can make friends, study together, improve their literacy, and engage in acts of service, increase their spiritual perception, and have healthy recreation. So you'll often see Baha'is like in these two pictures at the bottom of your screen, sitting in circles, circles for consultation, learning together how to improve the spiritual and material conditions of their community. And it's part of a process of action, reflection, and consultation. That's a cycle. So you may remember I shared that meditation shows up in different ways in community life. So one of the ingredients is a process of reflection, individual reflection, but also collective reflection. And so it's through that process that we can learn together and make improvements in our neighborhood. There's also the idea that Baha'is will talk about that the seeds of the future houses of worship are present wherever prayers are said together, because prayer and meditation are at the root of community life. So wherever you find Baha'is trying to create or engage their neighbors in a process of co-creating community life, they'll often say prayers or meditate together about how to improve local conditions. And this is what we refer to as the seeds of a future house of worship, because houses of worship, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, and I'm about to show a short video about the houses of worship, they are established where there is a vibrancy in community life. So we'll watch a short video together and then have our second poll. And thanks in advance for your participation. The video is a little less than 5 minutes, and I'll begin it now.
Service and worship are at the heart of the pattern of community life that Baha'is around the world are trying to bring into being. They are two distinct yet inseparable elements that propel the life of the community forward. Prayer is integral to Baha'i life, whether at the level of the individual, the community, or the institutions.
Glorification of thy transcendent and all glorious being.
Thy name is my healing, oh my God. Baha'is turn their hearts in prayer to God repeatedly throughout the day, imploring His assistance, supplicating Him on behalf of loved ones, offering praise and gratitude, and seeking divine confirmations and guidance. Prayer is an important aspect of meetings of consultation and gatherings where friends have come together to undertake one or another project. Baha'is also host gatherings, open to all, in which people unite together in prayer. Devotional meetings such as these serve to awaken spiritual susceptibilities within the participants. And in concert with the acts of service they perform, lead to a pattern of community life that is infused with the spirit of devotion and focused on the attainment of spiritual and material prosperity. The integration of devotion and service finds expression in the Baha'i houses of worship. Baha'i houses of worship stand as universal places of worship, open to all the inhabitants of a locality, irrespective of their religious affiliation, background, ethnicity, or gender. and a haven for the deepest contemplation on spiritual reality and foundational questions of life, including individual and collective responsibility for the betterment of society. Although there are several houses of worship in the world today, the seeds for their eventual establishment are being planted in an increasing number of communities, and in the future, every locality will benefit from such a physical structure.
And Daniel, if you would launch the second poll, please. Thank you for that. So you'll see some questions on your screen. Go ahead and take a few minutes to answer those questions, and we'll reflect on them and have a conversation. Okay, if you haven't finished the poll, feel free to take another minute or so to do so, and then we can start just by chatting about the answers to them. And we're hoping that these questions spark some reflections. So if you'd like to share a reflection, feel free to raise your hand. And while we're waiting for hands to be raised, I'll just address the question in the chat. Are there practical recommendations for how to eliminate the extremes of wealth and poverty within this faith tradition? I know that there are teachings regarding profit sharing within a business, that workers should receive some percentage of the profit. There are also teachings about progressive taxation and about a communal storehouse in a village where each, after they've sold their agricultural goods or whatever they produce, that some surplus or some extra is stored by the warehouse, which is kind of a collective treasury. And the village is often given as an example, but the same principles would work at the level of a city. So those are two examples of Baha'i principles. I'm sure there are others: progressive taxation and collective ownership. Okay. Let's see, are there any hands for chatting or reflections about this first one? Some folks have responded that focusing on inner peace alone can make the world a better place. Some said that Baha'is turn to clergy forgiveness and guidance. Most folks have responded there are no rituals for Baha'is for how Baha'is should meditate. We wanted to share a little bit more about the context of the Baha'i faith, but it is true that there are no rituals for how Baha'is should meditate, but we thought that folks might want to discuss whether or not focusing on inner peace alone would make the world a better place. And the next question, we've talked about which of the following are supported by both science and religion to improve our well-being. And there are diverse responses. Meditation has most responses at about 94% of the folks saying that science and religion would agree that meditation is a way to improve our well-being. My understanding is that all of these are potentially ways that both science and religion might advocate improvement of our well-being. Are there particularly common contemplative meditation practices among Baha'is, given that none are prescribed per se? So you might call it a mantra, but recitation of 95 Allahu Akbars is one practice. There are Baha'i prayers, which you can access just by Googling Baha'i prayers. And those are prayers that are from Baha'u'llah, his eldest son, Abdul Baha, and you'll find Baha'is saying those prayers, or folks who are participating in Baha'i community saying those prayers in any locality. But Baha'is are free to choose any practice they wish from any tradition. Most commonly, you'll see Baha'is meditating on the meaning of the writings of Baha'u'llah, and then trying to contemplate what do they mean and how can they be applied in my context. And so going back to the first question about the harmony of science and religion, it's often in the context of the neighborhood that Baha'is are starting to see that coherence between science and religion in a process which is systematic, action, reflection, and consultation that informs the next steps. So often it's in the context of a neighborhood that gives a lot of Baha'i practices their meaning, and we're most visibly seeing how Baha'i principles, Baha'u'llah's teachings are being expressed. Is the betterment of the world possible? Now, this one we have 100% folks agree that yes, but it will require people and communities and institutions striving to improve themselves and serve others. And you'll see this question again has the twofold moral purpose, improving ourselves and contributing to the betterment of the world. And then number 4, there is not a distinct method for Baha'is, but meditation is part of different Baha'i practices. Select them from the following list, and we've already chatted about these. In particular, this question is meant to bring out that there are no monks or ascetics among the Baha'is. There's no practice of meditation for its own sake or extended practice that might include asceticism or using pain to elicit certain responses. Often when facing a problem, Baha'is will meditate on it, and as well as study relevant information and consult with one another, which of the following are appropriate to this process. And the options that everyone chose: sit in silence when considering a difficult problem and see if any solutions come to mind. Definitely. And then also, in light of the harmony of science and religion, studying data, consulting about previous experiences, and any relevant scientific findings. That certainly is also a part of Baha'i practice. And yes, we can, Daniel, thank you. We can go ahead and close the poll and chat briefly if there are any other reflections or questions on that first section of the presentation about the Baha'i teachings or Baha'i community life.
Oh, Tim.
Yes.
I just wonder, this is really basic, but are there any kind of dietary or any kinds of practices that are particular to Baha'i? That is there anything in particular that things aren't done or are done?
Baha'is don't drink alcohol. There's no prohibition on eating particular foods like pork. So Baha'is can be omnivorous. There are different writings talking about vegetarianism and veganism and eating fruits and grains. Let's see. Donya, feel free to chime in if there's anything that I haven't mentioned, but that's a great question. And Daniel, thank you. We can close the poll and stop sharing results as well. Yes, so there's a mention of the fast. Every year there's a 19-day fast during which Baha'is refrain from eating and drinking during daylight hours and pray and meditate during that time. They'll also carry out their lives as normal, going to work, going to school, going to sports practice if they're able to. But that's a time for prayer and reflection. That's always at the beginning of March for 19 days, which 19 days is Baha'i month, and the Baha'i calendar has 19 months consisting of 19 days. Yeah, Colin.
Sorry to interrupt again, but I just also wanted to mention that from my engagement with the interfaith community, just to respond how present the Baha'i are in the interfaith groups and movements, and like well beyond their kind of numeric representation, that the Baha'i involvement in interfaith work is immense, just to say. Very, very interesting.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, I know that Donia has some participation in her community in the interfaith dialogues. And I see also that there's a comment about Abdul Baha's writings on food being used as medicine in the future. That's right. There are writings from both Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah about how hot and cold, the temperature changes, and specific food can be used to treat different ailments. Okay, that may be all of our discussion at this point in the presentation. We've concluded kind of an overview of the Baha'i faith and the role of meditation and community life. In the next section, we'll look at what the houses of worship are and participate in an example of what that experience might be to be in a devotional gathering in a neighborhood. And I'll just close the poll and stop sharing my screen.
I was just going to add before putting on a slide for us to take a 5-minute break that there's also other, I guess, recommendations or suggestions that have come in the Baha'i writings about the benefits of, for example, sunlight and the effect that it has on our strength, joy and laughter as means of empowering, giving us the strength to deal with difficulties in life, exercise, and when and how to exercise. So there's a lot of details that, but if anyone's keen and interested, but that to say that Baha'is always turn to a trained physician, and none of that replaces a physician when there's need for consultation. Again, going back to that harmony of science and religion, but yeah, Tim shared all of those points already. So if it's okay, I'll share a screen that will have some background music, and we'll take a 5-minute break if we need to take a break or have something, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes time. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed that little bit of break. This is a picture of some of the houses of worship around the world. If you remember Tim earlier on speaking about them and mentioning that the houses of worship are envisioned to have dependencies around them that serve the needs of humanity and the community around them. This principle of worship and service can be applied in any setting, in fact, at a home, in a community center, at workplaces. In fact, the Baha'i writings mention that any place where mention of our Creator has been made, that place is blessed. The houses of worship are generally designed in consultation with the local community, and they signify something important to the culture of the locality. As Baha'is, we've been encouraged to refrain from idle talk and any endeavor, in fact, that starts with words and ends with words. So we've spoken a lot about the impact of meditation and prayer. And although worship, prayer, and meditation are essential to the inner life of the human being and our soul and our spiritual development, they must also lead to deeds and actions that give an outward expression of that inner transformation. This concept of worship is inseparable from service from a Baha'i perspective, just the same way that the houses of worship are inseparable from the services that take place in the communities around them. Idol worship cannot afford lasting results and satisfaction, nor lasting benefits to the worshipper themselves, let alone to humanity in general, unless and until it's translated and transfused into that dynamic and disinterested service to the cause of humanity and to our communities. And that really is also the vision for the dependencies around the houses of worship, but also in our neighborhoods, in our localities where we reside, and we can sort of bring that power of meditation to the services that we do, to the acts that we do with the community around us. So prayer is essentially a spiritual conversation of the soul with its maker. It's direct and without intermediation from a Baha'i perspective. It's a spiritual food for our soul, and it sustains us. The power that's latent in prayer and meditation manifested when it's motivated by the love of our Creator and love of our fellow humans beyond any fear or expectation of favor, and it's free from superstition. It's to be expressed with a sincere and pure heart, which then makes it conducive to contemplation and meditation so that our rationality can be illumined by its effects. So these conditions are really needed for meditation and prayer to be effective. And once prayer meditation is done in this manner, it really transcends the limitations of words and goes beyond mere sounds. It actually inspires selfless service to humankind. And that's why we constantly sort of reflect on these concepts of being and doing, of worship and service, so that our prayers and thoughts and meditations can translate to action and go hand in hand. So now we would like to have a taste of meditation and reflection on some writings and discuss their implications on our daily lives, but also for our society and community. I must say that there's no formula, as was mentioned before, in relation to Baha'i meditation. Baha'is are free to use writings of all faiths, all indigenous knowledges, and there's no set ritual about them. The way we're engaging with it today is one way, and it's, I guess, influenced by the virtual nature of this session as well. The theme of meditation that we picked today was peace, inner and outer peace, and the various tools and elements that contribute to establishing, I guess, that peace within ourselves and within our communities from a Baha'i perspective. It will start with a prayer followed by some quotes with a bit of background music. It will go for about 3 to 4 minutes. You're free to read the quotes that come on the screen or just listen to the music or turn off the audio or the music altogether, however you're comfortable to engage with it today. Before we start going through that part of the program, we thought perhaps we could take a minute and for ourselves think about 1 or 2 things that give us inner peace. So we'll take that minute and do that. Feel free to close your eyes or keep them open, sit however you're comfortable. Once that minute is over, music will start, and that's when the writings will come up on the screen and go for about 3 to 4 minutes. And then we'll discuss some questions that are inspired by the writings that are on the screen, but you're free to share your thoughts or just listening as well. So we'll start that minute of reflection now. I hope everyone enjoyed that bit of reflection time and the words, if you did engage with them. I thought perhaps we could maybe have a couple of people or more, if you wanted to share if there was any of the quotes or writings that stood out for you or you liked more. It'd be lovely to hear from everyone if there was something that really caught your attention. Feel free to raise your hand.
Tonya, it looks like Annie's requesting to see the first quote slide again.
Sure. That one? Is that the correct one?
Annie, let us know if it's this one or the next one you wanted to see. Oh, the second one, she says.
The second one, sorry.
Donia, is it possible to scroll through them all briefly again?
Sure.
I see a request.
Of course. Maybe I'll spend a few seconds on each one of them and I'll go through. Everyone's had a look at this one. Just move on to the next one. And I guess if anyone wants to speak to a specific quote, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. Colin, did you have your hand up? Please go ahead.
Sorry, this it just occurs to me also that, I mean, this is a bit more of a question, but that the needs of humanity and the community have changed since from the beginning of the faith. So, and you were talking a lot about how dialogue has become really central to Baha'i. Do you feel like there's that the response of Baha'i at the beginning is kind of also talking about evolution, like kind of re-expressing things? So I'm just kind of asking how you feel like the expressions of the experience of the faith has changed over time since it was begun. And it seems to, because in a response to how the different communities relate to each other, it seems like a really important part of the religion. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yes, the Baha'i writing. So apart from the laws that have been set in place by Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith himself, everything else is subject to change, and it revolves around the development of community and humanity, us in general. So as our understanding and our needs evolve, and as we recognize that we want things differently, those consultative spaces do lead with them. And I guess as science is also developing, these go quite hand in hand. So you're right, yes, it's very fluid by the development of our communities and our worldwide community, really, in general. Tim, please also feel free to share if any other points come to your mind. Nicholas, you've got your hand up. Please share.
I was just going to ask, there was a point that Tim had made earlier about messengers or physicians that were sort of, that came on at a particular time as they were needed. And I wonder, just maybe going a bit off of what Colin said, is there prescription in the Baha'i tradition of a forthcoming additional messenger, or is there, I guess, acknowledgement or consideration of the fact that perhaps, given the way that the faith works and given that there is this ability sort of to discern things and work with science, that people within the religion sort of will be able to kind of identify the needs of the world on their own sort of as things go forward? Does that make sense? There's kind of two questions embedded there in one.
Yes, it does make sense. Given that you touched on it, did you want to? I can share. We know that progressive revelation, that term that was used, or the coming of the messengers, and that renewal is ongoing. So Baha'is don't see themselves as or Baha'u'llah as the last religion. Yes, so you're right in that sense.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to share. Yeah, both of these questions are great and really get to kind of core aspects of the Baha'i teachings, that we can consider humanity as one being that evolves over time and is in interaction with God through these divine physicians or messengers. One thing that comes to mind is that justice requires that what's asked of humanity at any point in time be within its capacity. And so just in the way that the Baha'i teachings, we think of the manifestations or physicians as all-knowing and very wise, but what they say to us isn't according to their knowledge and their capacity, but it's according to our knowledge and our capacity at that time. And so the process by which these words were revealed was through a process of conversation, through questions and answers. So what we're reading are quotations from Baha'i writings. Most of them were letters that were responses to specific people's questions about, well, what does Baha'u'llah say about this? Or Abdul Baha, what should I do in this situation? And so the overarching principle is that there's this progressive revelation or progressive unfoldment according to capacity. And so we, like anything that requires a process of learning, like if we're running a marathon, it's painful and painstaking, and to build capacity is not easy. But then we might set a goal to run a 5K at first. And so that's our first goal. And then from there, we might try to do a 10K. And so each of the goals is in accordance with our degree of readiness and our current ability. And so there's an aspect of the faith that in the absence of these messengers or physicians, for this dispensation, for the Baha'i dispensation, there's the Universal House of Justice, and they continue to write letters and answer to questions, and they set goals that help the Baha'i community and the larger community trying to apply Baha'u'llah's teachings to our current social problems, set goals about how to do that. And the texts that we turn to and the texts that are these quotes are, again, largely the writings of Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah, two of the central figures of the Baha'i faith.
Hope that answers your questions, Dida. I'll just move on to the next quote as well.
This quote reflects something that is a theme through a lot of Baha'i writings, the balance of seeming opposites. So a lot of times conflict and contention between people arises through separating one versus the other, science versus religion, man versus woman, inner versus outer, and opposing them to one another. But I think this quote reflects something that's at the core of what we're trying to cultivate as a habit of mind within the Baha'i community, is not adopting false dichotomies where no false dichotomy exists.
Yeah, this example of the two wings is also used with science and religion, and also equality of women and men genders. You've got your hands up. Please go ahead. Is it?
Yeah, and me?
Yes, please.
I just wondered if you could give a concrete example of how developing this our inner spiritual nature through the writing, through the Baha'i writings, can you give a concrete example or two of how it can improve the world. We're talking about the betterment of the world. So can anybody, either in the audience or yourselves, really prove how or show us a way in which we can be part of the betterment of the world through the use of these writings?
What comes to my mind? So I guess the writings are only going to inspire thoughts for us. And so when we do meditate on them and then we do sort of look at science and bring that harmony together, then it's really a matter of bettering ourselves. This is what I understand from the my understanding of the Baha'i writings. It's a matter of improving ourselves, but then also using those as skills and talents as we become better, contributing that to our immediate environment. So it's really the implications of it on our society and our neighborhoods. It's almost like if I keep my house really tidy and I'm a very clean person and I put everything in its order in the house and clean up on a regular basis, but my neighborhood does not have that quality, others litter, I would eventually be affected by it. You know, this will eventually come to my house. It'll be very difficult for me to only work on my inner quality in that sense, and vice versa. If I live in an area where everyone else is quite tidy and I'm the only one who doesn't mow my lawn, or you know, I will slowly eventually impact, but I will also be impacted by the environment around me as well. And so I can think of it in that sense, that we don't only rely on these words, only the words from the Baha'i writings, but we've got all other faiths. We've got indigenous knowledges and we've got scientific evidence to reflect on them, but that implication and that being put into practice in consultation with those that we live with immediately, but also organizations and institutions around us. That twofold, I guess, process is one that's going to bring about longing change. And in fact, the recent sort of guidance that we've received from, you know, from the House of Justice that Tim was mentioning about has all been about these three players in our society: individual, community, and institutions, as three protagonists in bringing about any change. And so if the three are not working together, the change may be seen, but it's not going to be long lasting. So it's powerful. Individuals play a really powerful part in the process, but it does also involve the other players in our community. I'm not sure if I've answered your question. If anyone else can think of examples, concrete examples also, please feel free to share. I'll move a slide forward as well.
So I remember the question is how does strengthening our inner powers help in the process of the betterment of the world? One of the inner powers mentioned by Abdul Baha in that quote is memory. And in many of the Baha'i activities, participants are asked to memorize short quotes that will help inspire them to undertake noble deeds. And one of them in this community building process is: the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. So in committing those words to memory, then participants are faced with thinking about, well, what do those words mean, and engaging the power of comprehension. So if that's true, what does that mean for me to undertake pure and goodly deeds, or to show forth commendable and seemly conduct? And it actually leads to a lot of very good discussion. And I think that those are the seeds that lead to action. And for many of the, for instance, junior youth groups, they might start with picking up trash in their neighborhood, or thinking about more complex dynamics of social justice in their locality. So for instance, one of the questions in a junior youth text is, can you be just in an unjust context? And so then the youth are encouraged to think about, well, what does it mean for me to act justly in an environment that is steeped in injustice? and they can reflect on their individual and collective lives in that context and think of ways to improve themselves and their environment.
Thank you.
And so this was the last quote on that series. Was there any other comments or thoughts about any of them? And if not, we had a few questions inspired again by the same quotes that we'd sort of put on this slide, and we thought we'll seek your thoughts as well, and we'll just have a bit of consultation. You don't have to comment on every question, but if one of them stands out to you or you have something to share about one or two in particular, please raise your hands and we can have a bit of consultation. But you're also more than welcome to just listen in if you feel more comfortable that way.
There are some questions in the chat.
I need to get my head around the chat as well. So let's have a look.
Joe asks, just wondering if Abdu'l-Baha is still living, how the Baha'i international community is structured, temple leadership, and the mechanism for obtaining consensus for community decisions. And also another question, if I may, what is the teaching about afterlife?
Did you want to answer them too, or did you want me to?
Yeah, please, feel free.
Yes, so now Abdu'l-Baha passed away about 100 years ago. The Baha'i international community and the way it's structured, so every community within a council area has a local community, and the affairs of that local community are governed by the local spiritual assembly, who are elected from the members of the community themselves. So the members elect for that spiritual assembly. There's no sort of electioneering around it. It's a very sacred and confidential process. At the regional level and at the national level, there's also the National Spiritual Assembly, and then regional institutions that support with all these sort of community development and community activities that we were spoken about. Again, the National Spiritual Assembly is elected by delegates who represent the members of the community. At the localities, it's all by election. And every 5 years, there's an international convention where the Universal House of Justice is also elected. So it's all through an election process, confidential, and every member of the community can be elected on any of these institutions. Have I missed anything on that one?
I just want to chime in about temple leadership. So the Baha'i temples or the Baha'i houses of worship are not for Baha'i rituals or Baha'i activities of any sort. There might be open devotional gatherings. There are never talks or lectures in the Baha'i temples itself. They're built as a space, as a service to the community, so that people of any faith or atheist or agnostic, whomever, can come and pray and meditate silently And from time to time, there might be music or prayers read aloud. But those temples are not, for instance, like a meeting house for the Baha'is of the local community. And then the mechanism for obtaining consensus for community decisions often will practice consultation. And it's something that, Baha'is haven't perfected, but we are trying to develop this method of consensus building. And again, its aim is to understand the truth of any given question and to do that through a process that's frank and loving and come to a decision. And of course, we can't entirely under the truth of any object under question, but we might be able to advance our understanding. And one of the principles there is that if a decision is made in unity and then carried out in unity, even if it's wrong, then we'll discover that and be able to right our thinking, correct our thinking. But if, for instance, we're plagued by disunity in our process of decision making, and then a decision is carried out and some people don't agree with it, and if they were to sabotage the decision, we'd never know clearly whether or not it was the right or wrong thing. So one of the principles in decision making and community consensus is about supporting decisions that are made, hopefully unanimously, but if not, then by a majority.
And so the question about afterlife also, so we believe that our soul continues on, our spiritual life continues on after death, after our physical body has life of our physical body has ceased, and that's our true life. There's a lot of examples given in the Baha'i writings to help us, I guess, understand it, given that it's something that we don't experience, that the afterlife is really quite mystical. And the reason for acquiring and being good, being and doing and trying to do good for humanity really stands out in this particular example that's given in the Baha'i writings about a child. When a child or a fetus is in the womb of their mother, they have no idea of the world outside them. But at the same time, they're developing their senses, their limbs, their physical, I guess, faculties. And they don't know why. They probably don't see a need for it. But when they come to this world, they will be using all of those that they all need it. And so it's sort of likened to why we need to sort of do our best in our material life here, because our soul continues on, and those capacities that we're building are needed for our spiritual progress after life. Was there any other examples anyone else would like to share? Someone has asked about the source of the quotes. I'll be happy to share the sources. They all come from published writings. So compilations of the writings of Abdu'l-Baha or Baha'u'llah that have been put together. There's many writings, authoritative writings in the faith. Colin also has his hand up. Please share.
Thank you, Donya and Tim. Just wondered, like, sometimes in the different, say, the Christian tradition and others, you might spend some time contemplating. You talked about the attributes of God, but also that could be things like love or mystery and things. And so that sometimes gets described as a bit of a contemplative discipline, or something that, a Christian might do through, prayer. Are there similar kinds of things that you're that the sense of meditation is connection to God in those kinds of ways, or connection to mystery in those kinds of ways, like a participation or an experience of God through that? Is there anything similar?
So reflecting on qualities of God, that's the specific question you're asking, is that right?
Yeah, like so the reflecting on some of the qualities of God, or some of the you know, the attributes of the things that are kind of, you know, beautiful. Or so instead of it's say you're trying to understand, we talk about it as being sometimes it's a type of theology, but sometimes they just describe how you're contemplating who God is or how God works. It's just a kind of a common discipline in some of the other faith traditions. Is it something that the Baha'i do?
I can, a couple of things come to my mind, but I hope Tim can also share a bit as well. So of course, you know, in trying to understand who we are and where we come from. But again, as was mentioned earlier, we sort of understand God being beyond our comprehension. And although we know of the qualities, we also have the messengers and the writings of the messengers to reflect on, as a way that's sort of tangible for us, and as a way for us to communicate and understand God's, I guess, wish for humanity for the time and day. So in that sense, there's a lot of examples also given in the Baha'i writings from nature that helps us understand the spiritual qualities, or how this relationship works. That would be a lot more tangible for us to relate to understand. But again, the examples, reflecting on God, Him, our creator, is really that unknowable essence, like the sun, the example that Tim gave early on, that thinking about it will like the sun, the heat and the light will burn us away, but through the manifestations we try to get to know His teachings. But please share also, Tim, or others who may have other examples to share, or other explanations.
Yeah, this metaphor of the sun is powerful and goes throughout the Baha'i writings. The sun being the source of all life, the source of our vision and knowledge about reality, a metaphor for God. And one of the metaphors for understanding our own station is that our heart is like a mirror. And the mirror has two components. There's the reflective metal and the glass. And these reflect our material and spiritual aspects. So our duty, a metaphor that we can use in daily life to think about these two aspects, is how we polish the mirror of our heart to best reflect divine attributes. And so just during the course of the day, we can think about, in what way can I respond to the situation that's unifying? Baha'u'llah says that when we focus on the material aspects of other people, we will find their faults. We'll necessarily see their faults. But if we focus and cultivate our own capacity to see the names and attributes of God within them, we'll be able to see those things. And so he says, the perfect eye beholds perfection. And so another way that this is in practice in community life, of a practice of focusing on the names and attributes of God so that we're more familiar with them and able to perceive them, is at the 19-day feast. So the Baha'i calendar focuses our attention every 19 days on a different attribute of God, because the Gregorian calendar, January, February, and March are names either of constellations or past monarchs. The names of the Baha'i months, and we use both calendars at this point in time, but the names in the Baha'i calendar are names like beauty, perfection. There's actually a name of God and a month dedicated to questions, which I found really beautiful when I was learning about the Baha'i faith, because one of the other principles of the faith is the independent investigation of truth. So to feel encouraged in that, and to know that asking questions and responding to questions is something that reflects a divine attribute, I think is a really beautiful thing. So you'll notice that those are a few of the ways that thinking about divine attributes and our relation to them are woven into the calendar, daily life, the 19-day feast. Those are a few examples.
So feel free to still ask questions or raise hands. I'll also read these 4 questions in case anyone wanted to share any thoughts, really looking at the implications of those quotes that we read now on our daily life or with our community. How do we practice seeing all humanity as friends? How do we balance our material and spiritual development? What kind of melodies bring joy to your heart? And what are the ways we have been or want to be practicing unity on a daily basis? Or any other questions that came to your mind as we were reading the quotes? It'll be lovely to hear a few thoughts.
Ideally, we would be able to be in person and have an experience of a devotional gathering together or hear each other's voices in person. I just wanted to share kind of a story about devotional gatherings when I was living in Chicago. And this is in response to that 4th question: what are ways we have been or want to be practicing unity on a daily basis? There's something about sacred space, I think, that cultivates unity. Again, along the lines of being able to focus our attention not just on the material or the shortcoming aspect of ourselves and those around us, but thinking about those ways that we reflect divine attributes. But hearing others read something in a heartfelt way or share reflections that are heartfelt, I think cultivates unity within a group. And for the past few months in my neighborhood in the north of Melbourne, I've been starting to cultivate a small devotional gathering for that purpose, to reflect on things like justice, unity, friendship, and we'll say a few prayers together and then reflect on quotations, just like Donia was beautifully leading us through to this point, to be able to reflect together.
Thank you, Tim. Nicholas has asked a question in the chat. Would you be willing to share how your own contemplative practice has developed, from where you draw your inspiration, and how it helps you in your faith or life? I can share first, very honestly. Like many other people in the world, I find it difficult to have my mind quiet. You know, there's always a lot that's happening, and so it makes it difficult to meditate or contemplate. As you know, and so something that I've generally found is it goes sort of to later on really drawing on the power of contemplation before going to sleep. And in the Baha'i writings speaks about how spiritual our soul is really awakened while we're asleep, and scientifically it really there's quite a lot of things that have come across in relation to how really body functioning really reduces, and so I personally try to draw on that power of meditation and repetition, and using that 95 times alapa, and thinking about things and researching about them before that sort of a sleep time, and really drawing on the soul searching, our spirit being so awake while we're asleep, and allowing my soul to get nourished in that sense. But it's difficult. It's not easy with a full mind that's running constantly. I wonder if others have any other, but this is not a Baha'i thing, it's just something that I have found helpful myself to really try to get a lot out of my soul searching and investigating while I'm asleep. I really feel I'm connected with that. Tim, do you have any particular practices that you wanted to share, or anyone else?
I know that one of the mystical writings, Baha'u'llah says it's a proof of the soul that in sleep we might see something that is yet to come, that somehow the soul travels in sleep. But regarding my own contemplative practice and how it's developed, I've gone through different stages of meditating and not meditating. I've been a Baha'i for about 15 years, and part of Baha'i practice is to say prayers and read from the writings or recite the writings morning and evening. And I've ebbed and flowed in that practice. I'm not always on the ball about doing that, but often I've noticed that I'm more centered when I do that. And perhaps like most other people, I'll, during times of difficulty, go more intensely into prayer and meditation, asking for relief from suffering. And I've noticed that my constancy in saying prayers and the belief that there is some power to prayers, I'm able to recite certain ones of them and feel in my body a sense of relief and a sense of being supported. It's almost as if practicing saying prayers stores up energy that's then of use, or I can call to mind or call to my aid something of greater power at that moment. And during fasting, I've often had very interesting experiences with different flows of energy or states of interoceptive states, where I was curious, like, what is this that I'm experiencing during fasting? I mean, clearly at certain points you're experiencing intense hunger, but then it sparks a whole lot of questions about, well, how is this fast, which Baha'u'llah says its purpose is for spiritual awakening, how is it inspiring that? And I've often felt more connected to those around me during the fast, which invokes a sense of wonder and mystery, like Colin was asking about earlier.
Can I just follow up on that? It was quite interesting in both of your responses. There was a quote earlier about taking care of both the physical or the material and the spiritual, right? The two wings. And it just occurred to me, sort of in both of your responses, there was an element of both in terms of contemplative practice, right? And that's something that I've heard about previously discussed sort of in a particular conversation, a context I had with someone who's Muslim, in the context of the prayer, both performing the function of helping them to connect with Allah, but also the function of helping them to ground themselves and relax themselves and physically be at peace. And so it's interesting to me, because what I heard in both of what you said is this element of there's a element of the contemplative practice that looks after the spiritual, helps you sort of feel more connected, more like there's potency to prayer, more like what you're doing is useful. But then there's also this element of it looking after yourself kind of in this world physically, and helping you to relax or calm down or be present or whatever it is that you need. So I just thought I'd share that. I thought it's quite interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, throughout the Baha'i writings, there's kind of an emphasis on the mystical and the practical at the same time. And we're often encouraged to look to Abdul Baha as an example of walking a mystical path with practical feet. And so then the question arises, well, what's mystical or spiritual, and what's practical or material? And I've often meditated on that, and I think that's part of what I hear you reflecting, Nicholas, about this relationship between the mystical and the material, or the mystical and the practical. And my best understanding at this point in time is that the material refers to that which we already understand, and has to do with in the chain of being, the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. But then there are aspects of the divine that are beyond our understanding. And at one point in time, Abdu'l-Baha says, to the mineral, the vegetable is spiritual. So I think it's a relativity from our point of view of what is spiritual or what is material. And I see that Colin has raised his hand.
Yeah.
If you had a response as well, please. But I just noticed kind of in your response as well, like, do you feel like in Baha'i, it seems to kind of cultivate this open receptiveness and intelligent receptiveness to things, where sometimes, like, you know, in a meditation, you can be kind of seeking quite a specific type of experience, but here you're talking a lot more about kind of you're receptive to your community, you're dialoguing, and it kind of seems to have a different type of tone. The practice has a different kind of tone and kind of attitude toward receptivity and dialogue, and I feel like does that kind of slight difference, do you feel like that is a part of your contemplative practice, or is it something that it waxes and wanes a little bit?
Donya, I don't know if you had anything to share.
No, please go ahead.
So what comes to mind for me is this attitude of openness. I really love that my faith, that through looking through the perspective of my faith, I can see the adherents of other chapters of religious revelation as friends, and I can be open to going to church with them or sitting to meditate with them. And I felt warmly welcomed by Zen practitioners in the Kwan tradition in Cambridge, where I was able to go and sit and learn about Zen meditation. I'm from Colorado, and I sat in meditation with members of Tibetan Theravadan tradition. So I feel like my experience is enriched by this attitude of openness to other traditions, even though from a Baha'i perspective, we would consider it just as the unfolding of a single tradition. Additionally, there are writings that say that the kinds of experiences that folks might meditate in order to receive, we shouldn't necessarily do that. That if God wants us to have, say, a mystical experience, that will be vouchsafed to us. We don't necessarily have to sit in meditation in order to feel something. And then there are also ways that just through service or just through our daily interactions, there's an attitude of wonderment towards the extraordinary nature of those daily interactions that can arise by focusing our attention on divine attributes.
I just wondered, we've already sort of gone into the question and answer. We had allocated some time, but we can perhaps continue that. But I just thought to see if we wanted to also share with you whether if you were sort of willing to participate, if you were interested to participate in the activities that have been mentioned throughout the sessions today in relation to community building with our neighbors, or our colleagues, or within whatever setting involving children, adolescents age group, or as adults or other members of the community. If there's anything that anyone's in particular interested to participate, there's some contact details on this slide, but we can also provide you more direct information or contact details at localities. So feel free to contact Tim or myself, or also reach out to the email address at the very top, or have a look at baha'i.org.au for more information. I'll leave this slide on for a bit in case anyone wants to take a note of details, but really please feel free to continue with the questions and answers. We'll keep going with that, and we've got about, if I'm not mistaken, 10 more minutes. Colin, please.
So when's the period of fast? What month in the Gregorian calendar?
In March.
Oh, okay. Does it culminate with a kind of a festival or anything like Eid or anything like that?
Yeah, so the Baha'i months are 19 months of 19 days. And so there's, depending on whether it's a leap year or not, there's 4 or 5 days just before the month of fast, which we call Ayyamahal, or Days of Joy. So it's a period of, I guess, generosity, where everyone celebrates, and it's a joyous period for Baha'is around the world, and particularly to practice acts of generosity and celebrate. And then the beginning, generally 2nd or 1st of March, is the month of fast. So it starts then, and then it finishes by about 19th or 20th, depending on the year. And that will culminate in one of the Baha'i holidays, Nowruz, or New Day. And that's a holiday that's celebrated as well. That's the end of the month of the fast as well, and the beginning of a new month from that point onwards.
So, question in the chat.
So most Baha'i holy days are open to celebration with the larger community, and Nowruz, like Donya mentioned, is one of those that is a huge party with lots of food and a lot of people that were formerly very hungry for 19 days, very eager to see one another and hang out and share food. So it's often a big potluck or big dinner. There's also the festival of Rizwan that follows shortly afterwards in April, and that's always a great one to attend. I know there are also upcoming holy days in October. And Donya, if I don't know if you're able to look up the upcoming festivals. I'll also address Joe's question. May I ask, what are the most important things about Baha'i that attracted you to it? As you say, it's the second most widespread religious community. It is the second most widespread religious community, in large part because the purpose of the faith is to bring about unity, and it's established through a democratic and sometimes very slow process of reaching out to every possible community, person, ethnicity across the world, so that the election of the Universal House of Justice would represent the whole of humanity, some cross-section of the whole of humanity. So what we've engaged in over the past 170 so years is this global experiment on a level that has never been tried before of democratic representation. And so the things that most attracted me, and maybe Donya would also be willing to share, are the principle of the independent investigation of truth, which I spoke about earlier. I just love that the Baha'i faith, although it's a very heartfelt and mystical religion in many ways, it's also very rational and it incorporates science. And the fact that that balance is one that we're striving for in our individual practice is definitely a really beautiful thing. And in becoming Baha'i, even though I didn't grow up Baha'i, I grew up a Christian in the United States, I find that I have an extended family across the entire world. And I'm new to Melbourne. I arrived here in March, but I feel like I have family here in Brunswick where I live and across the Melbourne area that even though I just met them within the past few months, there's a true feeling of love and connection.
So I'll just share the upcoming Baha'i holidays for 2022. There's 2 holidays coming up if anyone was keen to participate, and we can connect you with your local community. One's on 26th of October and one's on 27th of October. So twin holidays, Birth of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And then the next ones will follow from March of 2023. Yeah, equally that principle of independent investigation of the truth. I was born in a family where my parents were Baha'is, but although you go through Baha'i education and in fact you learn about all religions, growing up through Baha'i education classes, that decision was very much an individual decision, and that independent investigation of the truth was hugely emphasized. I wasn't automatically a Baha'i when I turned a certain age. I needed to really investigate all religions, reality, the world, and see what I wanted to pick for myself. And I did, and I, just, yeah, that process I found quite beautiful. Growing up, the openness to share and to research and to investigate for myself. Do you have a question in the chat? I'm just trying to get this.
Looks like there's a Baha'i friend that shares, I come from a Jewish background. My parents are Holocaust survivors. The Baha'i faith has a blueprint for unity and eliminating prejudice, which I believe can redeem the prejudice that brought about that particular world tragedy. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I've often heard other Baha'i friends, and I feel the same way, that I didn't have to reject my previous upbringing in becoming a Baha'i, but just got to extend the circle of who I could embrace and call family. It seems we have just a few minutes left. I wonder if, Donia, we could explore kind of what they might, what friends who are interested in the faith might experience in community life if they were to contact their local community.
Sure, yeah, so just look through these ones that were mentioned previously about the activities that are central to community life with the Baha'i community, but they're not limited to Baha'is. In fact, a lot of times you may not have anyone in any of these activities who are Baha'is, but anyone from any backgrounds, whether they believe in religion or not, they can sort of be part of the training process to be able to hold any of these activities with their own group of friends, neighbors, family contacts. So children classes, they focus on spiritual qualities for children, which we spoke about as attributes of God, and they learn these through various methods using a storytelling arts, quotes that they commit to memory, music and songs, and cooperative games that teach them cooperation, all those principles suitable for their own age. And this is mainly targeted for 5 to 11-year-olds, and everyone's welcome. There's junior youth groups. The Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program really focuses on bringing all those elements together for our physical and spiritual development. Really helps the junior youth acquire spiritual perception. So when they see something, they actually can use not just their physical eye, but also their insight in seeing a bit beyond it and develop those tools so that they're not easily affected by what's out there for that age group, the 12 to 15-year-old age group, social media, you know, everything around them, but also their sense of justice and altruism at that age is really responded to. It involves service projects that they design themselves. The animator who runs the group, I guess, or facilitates discussions and enable the junior youth to be able to carry out those service projects so they get to taste changing community or their immediate environment from early on. And there's also study circles and devotional gatherings that we spoke about before. Study circles really act as that training process, so anyone can facilitate any of these groups.
Thank you, everyone, so much for your participation today.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Donya. Yeah, thank you so much for the workshop today, and thank you for everyone for joining us. I've definitely learned a lot. So just on behalf of the Contemplative Study Centre, I'd just like to thank you again, but also ask everyone to please subscribe to our newsletter and stay informed about this and other upcoming events hosted by the Centre. Thank you again for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. So